All right, so you're in the right room. This is the Exemplary Cybersecurity Improvements, applying the Department of Homeland Security 7 strategies to defend industrial control systems. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and get started. First topic always is the legal disclaimer. So since we are being recorded, I've been told to go ahead and read this for you. The information and opinions expressed in the presentation are not those of the authors and do not necessarily represent, are those of the authors and don't represent the official policy or position of Exchange or Emerson Automation Solutions. So we'll start off with some brief introductions. Myself on the bottom, Ben Jackman from Emerson Automation Solutions. I'm based out of the Delta V headquarters in Austin, Texas. With me here, we've got Paul Miano from Marathon Petroleum. He's with the corporate operations technology security team. And we also have Ron Sprengeler from MarkWest. He's the operations project lead for the project that we're talking about here today.
So MarkWest Energy Partners we're a wholly owned subsidiary of MPLX, which is a subsidiary of Marathon Petroleum Company. This is a fairly new development. We were acquired about 2 years ago in December of 2015. So a lot of the changes that you'll hear about during this presentation are a result of that acquisition and change. We had always been a very lean running, quickly moving, quickly developing company that had, like a lot of midstream gas companies, not put a huge emphasis on cybersecurity and had wanted to, but hadn't had the right impetus to do it. So Paul will talk a little bit about what that is. The project that we're talking about is in 4 of our plants in the Utica Shale area of Ohio. So that's what we'll be discussing primarily. So the things we want to talk about in this presentation are really, where do you start with cybersecurity? At the beginning of this project, we were sort of in that boat. We had talked about some things and had ideas about what we thought were good ways to go about cybersecurity, but we didn't have a coherent plan or design about all the parts that we needed to put in place. The DHS 7 strategies to defend ICS, which really is what informed what the design and plan ended up being. The solutions that were selected by MarkWest, and the business results that we achieved through the project.
So when we took a look at the project and took a look at the assets that MarkWest had, from my perspective, coming in from Marathon, we had a certain methodology for securing our ICS systems at our refineries, our terminals, our pipeline, and so we wanted to bring some of that experience to MarkWest with the understanding that there was some intention to go down that road. Just with the growth potential, it was a lower priority. So we knew we wanted to improve the cybersecurity solutions to comply with Marathon standards, to a certain extent develop specific standards for the business at MarkWest, because it's a little bit different as a midstream company as opposed to a refining, primarily refining organization. So we needed to make sure that it made sense for the business to continue to grow, continue to operate, continue to do the good work that they've done over the years. Was a lack of resources within their organization, so part of the project was to develop those resources, hire folks in, dedicate folks for the OT side. That work is been very challenging with the wide geographic dispersion of the company. So it's been a lot of good work by all the people within their organization. Lots of times you don't really know where to start, and coming in with the perspective from Marathon of how we implemented our systems, we're able to give good baseline for MarkWest to initiate the project. So that's really what we try to do, is help MarkWest develop that kind of a grassroots effort.
All right, so just some background on the Department of Homeland Security study called the 7 Steps to Effectively Defend Industrial Control Systems. This study was published about a year ago, and the actual input to the study was all the cybersecurity incidents that were reported to the Department of Homeland Security ICS CERT over the years 2014 and 2015. So they used that information, and then they looked at a number of cybersecurity tools and protections that could have been applied across those reported incidents. And they published these results here showing that any one of these solutions could have been applied to protect those, and the percentage quantity is shown there. So the top one was implement application whitelisting, which actually would have accounted for 38% of the incidents that were reported. So they would have been protected if they had application whitelisting. Number 2 on that list was ensure proper configuration and patch management. This one has become even more prevalent and more of a focus from what I've seen, especially with the recent ransomware events and things like that. Number 3 and 4 they sound a little bit obscure, but we'll try to demyth that as we walk through kind of what that means. You know, reducing your attack surface and building a defendable environment, kind of generic topics there. And then the manage authentication, all about user management there, monitor and respond, and then implement secure remote access. So you can see, just by applying the top 2 solutions there, you're covered by 67% or a majority of the problems that face a control system. And then the other point to make here is that whenever you apply these solutions together, you have an effective defense in depth strategy. So you can kind of see this is the onion model where you have multiple layers in your security protection. You're implementing different kinds of protection, not just a single kind of cybersecurity protection.
So the first topic we'll talk about is application whitelisting. There's been a few talks here at Exchange surrounding application whitelisting. It's probably the single most effective methodology for using to protect your systems at your endpoints. Really what whitelisting is, it's basically you develop a list of applications and processes that you will allow to run on your system. Anything that's not in that list gets blocked. Very effective against the execution of malware. And in certain cases, depending on the types of endpoint, the static nature of that endpoint makes it a very good target for whitelisting because there's very, very few changes. You've always got to go through a process of defining what your system looks like, what's the allowable software that you're going to run on that system in order to create your database. You certainly have to monitor your system and understand how that works before you go in and effectively start to block that. How does it differ from blacklisting? Blacklisting is your typical antivirus where it's got a list of things that it says it won't run, as opposed to a list of things that you will allow to run. So it's a little bit different technique. You also have to take into consideration that software does get updated. If you don't keep your systems updated with the proper software hashes, you could get behind on that, and you could potentially get yourself into a situation where you're allowing things that are potentially not necessarily malware, but things that are vulnerable to allow to run. So there's some effort there to put into the system to make sure that it's effective.
Yeah, and just to build on that slide, on the right-hand side, we have the Delta V recommended solution. So if you come by the exhibit hall or you go to the other session on application whitelisting, what you'll hear about is our McAfee solution for whitelisting. And we also recommend, tailoring or combining that with blacklisting as well, so that you have kind of a front door, back door approach, and you just notice that whitelisting is not a silver bullet. It's not going to solve all your problems. it's good to have something that also protects against those known threats as well.
The second set of things that are recommended is to ensure proper configuration and patch management. So it's difficult to understand what threats apply to you if you don't have a complete inventory. You need to know what's in your environment, all the endpoints, all the versions of software that are running on those things, so that you can actually manage vulnerability within the environment. The second thing that's interesting is the software inventory and knowing what you actually have. It's gotten to the point where, and the question is, what is Havoc's? Who in the audience has heard of that little malware bit? Okay, not many folks. It's interesting, not just in the sense that it's malware, but it actually, the creators of this little thing found a way to inject it into software downloads that were on legitimate third-party sites of folks that provide software that runs in ICS environments. There were 3 known vectors that they got it installed into, and so people downloaded this software thinking, oh, I'm just getting an update for my camera program was one of them, and then it installed Havoc's and was in their environment without anybody doing any of the normal things that you think of as risks of clicking on a link in an email or any of those things. So that's a way that's being used to directly inject things into these environments. So the point of all that is that it's actually gotten to the point where you need to make sure that you have a valid hash on the software that you're installing on your system, because somebody might have gotten to it in between when the manufacturer packaged it and when it got downloaded to your system. Another challenging part of the inventory is to get an inventory of your PLCs and RTUs and the firmware that those guys are running. This is obviously a lot more difficult than just getting a list of the servers that make up your Delta V system. So all the things that are within the plant or in a distributed environment that connect into your Delta V environment, you need to know what those are and what the versions of the firmware is on those, and the tools that you use to configure those needs to be managed as well. So what's the program that you use to configure your Fanucs, and is that managed and dealt with the same way as anything else in the environment? And then sort of to that point, the last point, that an effective program really has to limit or ideally eliminate the connection of external laptops into the control network. Nothing against any of our software vendors, right? But if you want control of your environment, you need to know what's getting plugged into all those devices to make sure that nothing's being introduced that you're not aware of. Oh, sorry.
It's okay. Yeah, and on the Delta V side, if you look on the right-hand side, the kind of continuous cycle that we have drawn there is really what's called automated patch management. So we have a couple of solutions that we have that you can piece together to really automate this patching cycle. It's Windows updates, Delta V hotfixes, and antivirus updates. So all 3 of those, you can get updates through Guardian. Guardian can show you what your current patching status is on all 3 of those. You get those downloaded automatically. You can deploy and install those to each of your Delta V endpoints, and then you can use our Delta V registration utility to capture that status and then report it back into Guardian. So now Guardian is up to date with your inventory and with your patching status.
The third most effective methodology for protecting your ICS is reducing your attack surface. So the idea behind this is really kind of around network segmentation, where if you are able to effectively isolate your ICS from your business LAN, and then even within your ICS, if you're able to create zones, what I might recall or call a reliability zone, where you would only allow certain communication between certain zones that are absolutely necessary, that you're making sure that any external ability to interact with your system is absolutely necessary. We talk about the concept on the slide here of the firewall versus the data diode. Does anybody know what a data diode is? Unidirectional gateway? A couple of hands. Probably the most effective way to present information from your ICS in a read-only format. Now, certainly those are only as effective as your business need. If you've got a need for interactive use of your system from your business network, it's a little bit more complicated. You've got to do that through a firewall and through effective account management, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. You certainly want to lock down any unused ports on your switches. You want to make sure you understand all your data flows between your systems so that you can effectively identify when something is communicating to another device on your network or attempting to through a firewall that it shouldn't. And that would give you an indication that there's potentially a problem and you've had some type of an impact to your system.
Yeah, that's a good summary. So really reducing your attack surface, when I think of that, I try to think of, what is the attack surface? And that is, the place where the threat will come into your system from. So whether that's coming in from a firewall, coming in through a USB, coming in directly into your network, those are all different attack vectors that are kind of the surface of your system. And so we have a couple of Delta V solutions. You should be familiar with the Emerson Smart Firewall using the layered architecture model, such as that 2.5 network. We also build in some workstation hardening to protect the endpoints themselves. Protection against USB is a major thing. We have a group policy that we recommend in our KBAs as well to lock those down. And then the smart switches, we can actually lock the unused ports on those as well. So if anybody comes and plugs in a laptop, it's not going to work.
The fourth set of recommendations is around building a defendable environment. The first thing that obviously makes the most sense is to have a strong physical perimeter. So this is simple as putting a card scanner on the door that leads to your server closet that has all your Delta V equipment in it. If your Delta V workstations are in an open control room, putting a cage around them, locking them up, things along those lines where people can't physically touch them and do things like plug a USB into them is certainly a part of the first step in securing your environment. Network segmentation that Paul alluded to is probably the biggest way to stop the spread of anything that happens. So if, for example, our plants those 4 plants are on they're connected through a WAN. However, if something happens on one of those endpoints, it has to traverse a firewall to get anywhere else in the environment. So it can't get out of that little segment that it's already infected, come across the firewall and get to the next segment to spread itself through our environment. So network segmentation is critical to limiting the damage that happens by any infection that might make it into your environment in the first place, containing that. Restricting host-to-host communications is clearly a part of that. If System A in Dallas has to talk to System B in Houston, be very specific about that, but don't just leave it wide open since, people need to be able to have these things talk, and it's like find out what the requirements are, lock it down to as little as you can. If you have to have host-to-host communication, preferably not have that in the first place. And removable media technology is part of this, of course, right? If somebody can come in, as you alluded to, and plug a USB stick into a server, there's the potential that something will come in through that way. You can lock those down by group policy. There are other ways to make sure that you have inoculated USBs that get scanned before you can use them, and then they're validated as being compatible to run. Whatever solution you happen to end up with is fine, but clearly that's an easy way for something to get into your environment through a USB.
Yeah, and some of the solutions that Ron was just mentioning, we do also have down at the exhibit hall the Delta V Firewall IPD and the Tofino Network Firewall for connecting in a PLC or a third-party system. That's all about network segmentation. node-to-node, host-to-host communication protection paths, and then removable media. We also have that Blue Coat USB scanner station as well.
Managing authentication within your system is very important, making sure that you only allow certainly the people that should be there log into your systems, have access to your systems, log into the systems with the right credentials, the proper level of execution within not only the Windows system, but within your DCS systems, the Delta V systems. There are ways to manage that down to proper, so what's the word I'm looking for? You want to reduce the privileges. You want to have least privilege is the term that you want to use. Least privilege gives you the opportunity to really vet how people use the system and why they use it and even when they use it. Have a good password policy. Have that and make sure that your passwords change. Also, you want to make sure where it makes sense, you want to not have the same credentials on your business network as well as your control network. I know certain companies will allow that authentication to pass through the firewall. That's not something at the MarkWest solution we're allowing, just because there's certainly a greater risk if someone were to compromise a set of credentials in the business land. They could get in and take a look at things they shouldn't on the controlled network. Certainly, the recommendation from DHS does never share your active directory between your ICS and your business network.
And on the Delta V side, we have a couple of ways to implement this, such as using smart cards for multi-factor authentication. Always recommend a domain environment over a workgroup environment so that you can use something like Active Directory to manage your privileges and your users, which also integrates with Delta V User Manager, where we have those built-in keys and privileges for Delta V, where you can implement least privilege very easily.
So now we're getting a little lower in the list of priorities, and these are monitoring and response sorts of ideas and tools. So the recommendations are that you monitor your network for suspicious activity. This is things like intrusion detection and prevention systems, IDS, IPS, things that watch for, you understand what the traffic on your network normally looks like, and now all of a sudden you have a bunch more traffic or a different pattern. It's a way to say, maybe these guys are communicating with somebody they shouldn't be, looking for issues. So a SIM is a security information and event monitor, basically collects events from all sorts of systems and correlates them in time so that you can see patterns and understand if you're getting attacked, because there might be some network traffic involved and there might be some login activity involved and there might be something going on with your whitelisting software. You want to be able to correlate all that together and understand what the whole picture of you being attacked looks like. So that's the idea behind the SIMs. We're monitoring use and misuse of elevated privileges with our SIM and doing those things. Vulnerability management, of course, is a big part of this, blacklisting, as it's called, we've gone with, in this environment, with manual scanning of the system, and it's passive scanning because these systems are a little sensitive to being actively scanned for vulnerabilities, so we're fairly cautious. Of course, anything that might cause reliability problems in the environment gets a hard look before we say, yeah, we're going to do that, just because we're from an IT background, and things that you can do in an IT environment are not necessarily good ideas in an OT world. So we take a hard look at those things and work with our folks about what could cause reliability problems and not do those things clearly. And yeah, vulnerability management works hand in hand with configuration and patch management, as they state.
Yeah, so on the Delta V side, we have a SIM for Delta V systems that's powered by McAfee. On IPS side, or intrusion prevention or intrusion detection. We have a network security monitor that'll actually listen to the network traffic. And then when you do need to respond, Emerson does have some incident response services. We'll actually be doing another presentation when we talk about that. It's like a 2-hour roundtable about one of our incident response programs that we did with a customer.
And last but not least, secure remote access. If you have the need for remote access into your ICS system, what do you do to make sure that the person that's coming through really is who they say they are? This is what gets back to using multi-factor authentication for logging into systems. If you have to have some type of interactive access, if you need only read-only access, the recommendation from DHS is to go with a data diode that will only present that information out onto a business system somewhere. We've looked at Marathon at several of those technologies, and some are quite effective, others are not quite as effective, depending on, what the resolution of that data may need to be on the business side, what the business requirements are. Obviously, you don't want to have persistent connections into your environment that you're not aware of. You certainly want to set timeouts if you need to have those connections made available, so that you don't have someone in there longer. Somebody could, get in the middle of that conversation between the endpoint and your DCS and cause problems. Preferred methodology is to use some type of an operator-controlled connection. If possible, if you can utilize that technology, think of it as a lockout tagout. That way somebody on your ICS system is flipping that switch that says, okay, I'm going to allow somebody in here. I know who this person is. It's another level of authentication that you have at the human level. And obviously, two-factor authentication.
Yeah, and the first time I saw this study, I was really surprised to see secure remote access this far down the list. 1% of the incidents could have been fixed this way. So what that means to me is that a lot of the incidents with control systems are not happening from, hackers on a keyboard logging into your system. That's not how they're going to attack you. They're going to attack you with some passive malware or a worm that's going to spread through your network a different way. Or somebody brings in, a thumb drive in your network and they don't even know it's infected. So it definitely is important to think about securing your remote access. We do have a documented approach for this in our Delta V security manual. If you haven't downloaded that, I would recommend going to the Guardian website and getting that. It is an important topic, but really the takeaway for me here was I was impressed that actually this is not the major attack vector. Just to summarize some of the cybersecurity solutions that you can apply for your Delta V system across these 7 strategies, we put together this list here, starting from the application whitelisting, which we covered, and patch management. Those top 2, again, would cover the majority of the incidents, and then all the way down to secure remote access. So it's a good takeaway slide. I'm not going to waste your time reading it.
So how we went about taking a look at this from the MarkWest approach, in a lot of cases, Marathon came in and we said, okay, we've got certain methodologies that we use effectively in our ICS systems, but we also wanted to make sure that they were going to be compatible with the Delta V system. So certainly we engaged Emerson, we engaged the local business partner, we wanted to make sure that what we put in was going to be effective. Where we were going to deviate from certain pieces of these technologies, the type of pieces that Emerson kind of stamps with their approval, right? We went through a process of testing and making sure that the solutions we put in place were not going to impact the system in any way. Made sure we were doing things. Our SIM is not the SIM that Emerson recommends, but it's something that's passive enough that we know we can do and effectively manage within our system. And a lot of the onion layers that we had, or the outside layers, are technologies that we were more familiar with from our other OT systems that we were able to utilize. Certainly, one of the things that is here that we didn't really touch on very much is the cybersecurity training. So that's really effective in getting the word out to the user, understanding how they participate in the cybersecurity of the system. Certainly most companies have corporate cyber training that they go through. As part of our project, we developed very specific training, user training, for what changes were going to come, because we were making certain changes to the way the MarkWest users operated their normal day-to-day business. So sometimes you have to do that and make sure that you're tailoring that training specifically to what your users are. Backup and recovery. Without a good backup, if you have a failure and you don't have a way to get back to a known good state, certainly causes your recovery time to be significantly more. So that's probably the biggest takeaway, I guess. Mostly is to make sure that you're working with Emerson to make sure that whatever you put in place is going to be effective and is going to be manageable by everybody.
So the business results we've achieved through this project, we've chosen solutions within all 7 of those strategies. We've actually, based on the DHS studies, our solutions will block by far the most common incidents reported to the ICS. Let's see, I think, oh, there we go. They're all getting blocked. And but so it's a based on their studies, we're over 90% of the threats will be rejected by the environment that we've built through this project. And there's always room to improve. There's always new threats. There's always new security projects coming out. There are always new ways of thinking about it and putting things together in a way that work better and work more efficiently. So it's never, it's not as if anybody thinks, oh, great, we're done. We'll come back and revisit this in 5 years when we do our next Delta V upgrade.
All right, so kind of continuing around what our business results are. Obviously, you want to have improved consistency in the way that you manage your systems and operate your systems. And that really begins with a security baseline. Ron alluded to earlier about having a good inventory and having a good understanding of what your configuration looks like. Making sure that you know what that baseline is, you meet that baseline, and always are critical in how you approach it to say, well, how can we do better? It is an evolving process. Whenever possible, you want to eliminate that human error and make sure that you put good processes into place and review those processes and help. You want to make sure that the users understand how they participate in that overall strategy. With the patching and automated patching and automated backups, you're ensuring that you have a way to recover. You're putting yourself in the best position you can to make sure that if something does get into the environment, even through best efforts, it's only going to have a very limited scope of impact, and that's really what you're hoping to achieve. How to gain productivity? You want to minimize the amount of manual effort, but you're going to have a certain amount of manual effort. Lots of automated IT tools don't play very well within an ICS OT environment. So you've got to make sure that you put something in that's consistent and reliable. Automated tools do alleviate some of those manual efforts, but you're not going to completely eliminate those. And that's where it just takes time of building that trust with the operations folks and making sure that they understand that the work that's being put in is to make sure that that system is reliable as they can, because it is a 24/7 operation.
Yeah, so just to summarize, if you're having trouble understanding where to start for cybersecurity, you know, you're not alone. I mean, that's a common problem to have. But using something like the Department of Homeland Security publication here provides a methodological approach to select the most appropriate solutions for your system. You can help develop some standards for your OT environment using that. Really, it's a vendor-agnostic framework. I would encourage you to go download it. It's only about 5 pages long, so it's not going to take you all night to read. It's a quick read. You know, it's common sense, applying some common sense to the control system environment, and really makes you think twice about, you know, using a solution like whitelisting, because it does block so many different kinds of threats that are common to the control system environment. And MarkWest did a fantastic job selecting a lot of great solutions and applying all these steps for protecting their Delta V systems in Ohio. And then they're also going to take this approach and apply it to a couple more sites around the U.S. as well. So it's not going to stop here for them. You know, they're on this continuous improvement journey. So we do have some time now for questions. Got one over here.
So for the Marathon folks, if you're in an acquisition again or another, you look at their ICS, cyber posture as a consideration in an acquisition?
I think anytime, and I don't want to speak outside of my realm, but I think anytime there is an acquisition, you kind of look across the board. It's always going to be an informed decision when you do that, and that's really just good business, right?
So was that a checkpoint in this acquisition? Did you guys have that one?
I was not involved in that part of it. I came in after the fact, but I have no doubt that was part of the process.
Yeah, I will say that Marathon does raise the bar very high compared to some of our other customers. You know, a lot of the cybersecurity discussions I've had with different people from Marathon have really impressed me. So it's not really, speaking to how poorly MarkWest was beforehand, but just how highly and how focused that Marathon is whenever they look at cybersecurity.
And we've been on a journey for our cyber program on the OT side has really been a 10-plus year journey. So we've got a degree of maturity that we're able to bring into MarkWest to, help get them to where they really knew they wanted to be. They just, with the growth potential, it was not the highest priority.
Yeah, it's been great. We've gotten to evolve 10 or 12 years in about, 10 or 12 months.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's been fun.
Yeah. Another question here.
Yeah, from a Marathon perspective, you've been on this journey for some time. What advice would you give to an organization that hasn't started this journey?
Probably the biggest advice is it's always difficult to get started, right? So what you really need to take a look at is, okay, do I have any government requirements for certain regulations? Take a look at that first. Then to identify some control methodology that you're going to use, whether it's NIST 853 or 6443 or whatever it's going to be, something that makes sense to your line of business. And then also take a look at the NIST CSF, the cybersecurity framework, which will give you a really good overview of how to pull those controls in and identify what you want your target profile to look like. Everybody's target profile is going to be different. Everybody's business is different. Even from refiner to refiner or midstream to midstream, you're going to have certain things that are going to be common, admittedly, right? But each company has a different risk appetite, with risk profile for, or I'm sorry, not a profile, but a threshold for what you accept for risk. So, I think you kind of have to step back and kind of take a look at the whole organization and make sure that you have buy-in from management, and then also work to make sure that you're participating with the business, with operations, because at the end of the day, that full chain all the way from management down to the operational side is going to be where you have the success if you've got a single thought process all the way through.
Yeah, what I would add to that is it's, a combination of people, process, and technology. So don't just focus on the technology aspect, picking solutions. I would also, look at it holistically across your people and how they interact with the system, making sure that they're trained and you have the right procedures in place. One from the back.
Full-time resources are working?
Say that again?
How many full-time resources are working to maintain the cybersecurity?
Well, that's an interesting question. We've merged our OT cybersecurity into our normal IT function, so it's blended resources. There's one on-the-ground admin for this area who's dedicated to these 4 plants full-time. And then in terms of, there's a partial FTE from our security team involved, and there's a partial network person. I would say it probably adds up to, I don't know.
Five or six.
Yeah.
Well, 5 or 6 people probably at the corporate side, and then
Right.
on the boots on the ground is a little bit different. Yeah.
But those 5 or 6 people will also be able to support all of the other facilities that we're going to bring in under this program. So for 30 facilities or so, they'll be able to manage all that.
And it's all insourced.
Yep.
And certain companies will take a look at the resourcing and say, well, I want to outsource that information or outsource that effort. Some companies are more comfortable with that than others. And certainly from a Marathon and MarkWest perspective, we made the determination that insourcing that made the most sense for us.
So how do you manage your backups? Because you have about 6 corporate people with 30 facilities. Who does your backup?
I mean, ultimately, the management of the backup happens at the corporate level, but certainly you've got backups that happen at your endpoints, and that's really where we bring in and work with the local business partner to make sure that those things are working properly, and the folks in the corporate office make sure that those are effectively moved to an off-site locations for disaster recovery.
Great question. Got one here?
Yeah, I understand you're coming from IT into OT, or the other way say somebody entering my ICS. Yeah. Yeah.
There is some of that.
Yeah.
It's true.
That's what we used to say.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I did the opposite way, but how do you handle that? Because it's not easy. It's not easy to jump from, or there's still a lot of fight back from ICS guys.
There can be, and we've always worked fairly closely with, with a lot of our operations people to help maintain their systems and deal with them in some parts of our organization. In other parts, like Ohio, they relied more exclusively on their local business partners to do a lot of that kind of work. It's really just about talking to them, making sure that they understand. This is all I've ever done with MarkWest is these kinds of projects, working with the operations people directly. So they know that I don't bring the typical IT perspective of these are the tools and this is what we're going to do. I always say, right, I know where my paycheck comes from, and it's from those plants running. So reliability and availability of those things is my first priority. And once people understand that and they believe it, and they've seen me fight against the people who want to, we can just scan that system because that's what we do. Once they've won a few of those battles because they have the right people on our team advocating for them, it goes pretty smoothly after that.
Yeah, and really it's building that relationship. It's getting the buy-in from operations that, okay, they do understand that there's some differences there, but we're all on the same team, you build a credibility. And that, in a lot of cases, that just takes time. But ultimately, if you've got the right people, and that's really the key thing, you've got to have the right people in the right position to be doing that or making that effort and doing that work, you will get that credibility over time.
So, when you install the people, yeah, that's one solution. We did the other way, we outsourced most of our IT support. So when a big discussion, when it wasn't the OT side, was how to ensure that SLAs that we need were transferred to the IT contract because they're completely different.
Sure, yeah.
To business, so
Yeah.
that's one of the keys.
Sure, something that could wait 24 hours on a business system, you can't wait an hour for on an OT system. So you're right, if you're in an outsourcing set of circumstances, you're gonna have to build those SLAs into your contracts, and again, you're gonna really need to pick your outsourcing vendor very carefully to make sure that they understand the criticality of the systems that they're potentially dealing with.
Yeah. We have one more here. I think that's the last one.
Did you use any tools or automated processes to capture your landscape, the firmware versions or the software versions? And do you use any tools to keep that evergreen? Or, how do you manage that amount of information?
Well, we didn't have any tools when we started. So we started with some very fundamental things, network scans and things along those lines. As we're building out the environment, we're putting tools in place to assist with those sorts of inventories to help automate it. In some ways, some parts of the ACN won't be visible to those tools though, and so there will always be a manual management portion of it. There are additional confidentiality things that we've come across where we don't want to store this information in the same place we store other inventory, so we've had to solve all those kinds of problems since these are more critical systems.
Yeah, one of the best places to start, I would recommend, would be the Delta V registration utility. If you haven't done that already and put it in Guardian, you can actually export a lot of that from Guardian to Excel, put it in whatever other kind of format you want, but it gives you
The Delta V systems are easy with Guardian, but it's the non...
yeah, it's all the other things, yeah.
Yep, it is.
Good feedback.
That's the problem.
All right, we're done. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.